My name is Corliss, and at 70 years old, I have learned that peace is a fragile thing. It depends on small rituals, the hum of the kettle, the weight of sunlight on old wood, the quiet company of something unfinished but faithful, like the lemon cake cooling on my counter. That morning, I was smoothing its frosting into neat, pale swirls. My daughter, Kira, was supposed to be engaged that evening. She loved lemon cake. It had been her request since she was 10, the one she always asked for on birthdays. I wanted the cake to look perfect, simple, classic, like the kind of happiness I believed we still shared. The phone rang just as I set the frosting knife down. Seeing her name flash across the screen filled me with the small, familiar rush that motherhood never quite releases. I wiped my hands and answered, smiling. "Sweetheart, I was just finishing your cake," I said. "What time should I come by tonight?" There was a pause. 3 beats of the kitchen clock, clear and hollow. Then another voice came on, smooth and casual. "Nolan, oh, hi, Mrs. Anwin. You don't have to come tonight. We actually got married yesterday, for a moment." I thought I had misheard. The frosting knife slipped, hitting the counter with a dull clink. "You got married," I said. "Yes," he replied. Still cheerful, we kept it small. Only special people were invited. The words hung there, thin as glass. I heard the hum of the refrigerator, the faint cry of a gull outside. My hand trembled once, then stilled. "Well," I said, my voice steady only because I'd had decades of practice. "I hope it was beautiful." "Yeah," he said lightly. "It was perfect. Kira's busy right now, but we'll call you later." The line clicked dead before I could breathe again. I stood at the counter, staring at the half-frosted cake. The sunlight that had warmed the room a minute earlier now felt too bright, too sharp. I pressed my palm flat against the cool surface of the counter until the trembling stopped. Outside, a gull cried again, and somewhere deep in me, something answered, quiet, certain, and beginning to change. By evening, the frosting on the lemon cake had hardened into a thin, dull crust. I hadn't moved it from the counter. The knife still rested beside it, streaked with sugar and silence. The phone had stayed quiet all day. No call from Kira, no apology, not even a message to explain what had happened. When the sky outside deepened into that familiar coastal blue, I sat at the kitchen table with my tablet. I told myself I wasn't going to look, that I didn't need to, but curiosity, or maybe disbelief, has its own gravity. Within moments, I found it Kira's name, a new post, already flooded with hearts. The first photo stopped my breath. She stood barefoot on a patch of white sand, her dress pale and simple, sunlight catching her hair like a crown. Nolan was beside her, in a gray linen suit, smiling toward the camera as if he had won something precious. Behind them were faces I half recognized: his parents, his sister, a few of their friends. The caption read, "Best day ever, married my soulmate, surrounded by the people who truly matter." My name wasn't anywhere. Wasn't. Not in the caption, not in the tags, not even in the comments that said family only or so intimate, so special. I scrolled through the photos, one after another: Nolan's mother holding the bouquet, a toast with glasses raised, a sunset kiss. The world they had built in those pictures looked complete. There was no empty space for me to fit into. My chest tightened, but no tears came. Just a strange, hollow awareness, as if I were staring at a window that no longer opened onto my life. I set the tablet down, the screen still glowing. The reflection of the cake shimmered faintly in the glass, a small, unfinished thing that suddenly looked out of place in my own home. I turned off the light and sat there a while, The house too quiet. The kind of quiet that tells you you've been left behind. The next morning arrived gray and windless. The kind of morning that makes you move slower without realizing why. I sat at the kitchen table where the cake still waited, untouched. The frosting had cracked overnight. Thin white lines spreading like fractures across its surface. It looked exactly how I felt solid on the outside, split beneath the surface. I reached for my checkbook and the old calculator I kept in a drawer. It wasn't a decision. Not really. It felt more like gravity pulling me towards something I could no longer ignore. For years I had told myself that what I gave Kira and Nolan was temporary, just to help them find their footing. Rent. The car payment when he was between jobs. The hospital bill when she fell and sprained her wrist. Even the delivery fee for that expensive sofa they said was an investment in their new beginning. I began to write each amount down, flipping through old statements, tracing the pattern of my own generosity. Each figure came with a memory, her tearful call, his thank you text, my relief at being useful again. The numbers added faster than I expected. When I reached the total, the display on the calculator blinked up at me, $47,800. I wrote it out longhand on the last page of the checkbook, $47,800, because somehow the words felt heavier than the numbers. I stared at the ink until it stopped shimmering. Every dollar had been a quiet promise that things would get better, that love and help were the same thing. But they weren't. One was a gift. The other had become a habit. The room was still, except for the ticking of the clock. I pressed the checkbook closed and laid my palm over it. The air smelled faintly of sugar and salt. My voice barely rose above a whisper. Every dollar, I said, was a thank you that never came outside. The wind moved through the trees, gentle but certain, carrying the first hint that something in me was beginning to change. By afternoon, the gray light had settled over the house like a blanket that refused warmth. I made tea but forgot to drink it. The cup cooled beside me as I stared at the checkbook still open from the night before. The number written there looked impossible, too neat, too ordinary for the years it represented. I reached for my phone and opened the banking app. The familiar list appeared: automatic transfers for Kira and Nolan rent on the 1st of every month, car payment on the 10th. I had set them up years ago, telling myself it was easier that way, that it spared them the embarrassment of asking. My finger hovered above the screen longer than it should have. I could almost hear Kira's voice, soft and rushed mom, just until things stabilize. And mine, always answering, "Of course, sweetheart." The sound of the clock filled the room. I took a breath and tapped cancel. The confirmation window appeared, asking if I was sure. I pressed yes. The quiet afterward was almost physical, as if the air had shifted. I stared at the screen until it dimmed and went black, showing only my reflection, older, steadier than I remembered. It felt like closing a drawer on an old life. I stood and went to the counter, where the lemon cake still sat. The frosting had turned grainy. I scraped it into the trash, washed the dish, and wiped the counter clean. From the drawer by the sink, I pulled out my small notebook, the one I used for grocery lists and phone numbers, on a fresh page. I wrote in slow, careful script, "Stop paying for love." The pen left a small dent where it paused. I set the notebook beside the kettle and sat down to eat. Just soup and bread, nothing more. The house felt heavier but cleaner, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask to be filled. For the first time in years, I finished my meal without glancing at my phone, and the silence didn't frighten me. It felt like something earned. 2 quiet weeks passed. I kept expecting the silence to break, for a message to appear, for guilt to settle in and undo what I had done. But the days stayed still. The morning mail brought nothing but bills and grocery flyers. Even the phone seemed to sense the new boundary. Then, one Thursday, As I was pruning the roses, it rang. The screen showed Nolan's name. For a moment, I just watched it vibrate in my palm, the sunlight flashing off the glass. When I answered, his voice came fast and sharp. "The rent didn't go through," he said. "Did you change something?" "The landlord's threatening to evict us." "I know," I said. He paused, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "You know I stopped the transfers." I could hear him breathe hard, as though the air had thickened around him. "You stopped them, Corliss. That rent is due today. We don't have the money." There was movement on his end, a muffled voice. Then Kira came on the line. "Mom, please, this isn't funny. We could lose our home." Her voice was trembling. It used to undo me when she cried, the sound of it like a string pulling at my chest. But this time, it only made me steady myself. "You'll figure it out," I said softly. "Figure it out," she repeated, disbelief creeping in. "Do you have any idea what we're dealing with? You could have warned us. I could have—" I said, but I didn't. There was nothing left to explain. The silence stretched, heavy and uneven. Before the call ended with a flat click, I went back to the garden. The roses were dry at the tips, the soil needing water. I knelt and worked slowly, trimming what had withered, letting the petals fall into the dirt. My hands moved without shaking, each cut small and certain. The afternoon light softened, and for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't waiting for an apology or permission to breathe. I was just tending what was still mine. It was late morning when I heard the car pull into the drive. The tires crunched against the gravel, the sound unfamiliar after so many weeks of quiet. I was in the garden, kneeling near the lavender bed, trimming stems that had grown wild since spring. When I looked up, Kira was standing at the edge of the yard, her hands twisting together, her eyes already red. "Mom," she said softly. She hadn't called me that in weeks. For a moment, it almost disarmed me. Almost. I stood and brushed the dirt from my knees. "You're here early. I had to talk to you," she said, her voice breaking. "We never meant to hurt you." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt from the harbor. I waited for the rest, for the apology that would make things right, but it didn't come. Instead, she kept talking, words tumbling too fast. "Nolan panicked about the rent. He thought you'd forgotten. We've been so stressed. It's just been hard. Mom, you don't understand how bad it's been." I looked at her face, the face I had memorized since the day she was born, and saw traces of the little girl who used to run barefoot across this same yard, asking for lemonade. But that girl was gone. "I understand more than you think," I said quietly. "You've had a hard time, yes, but so have I. I spent years paying for your comfort, thinking it was love." Tears slid down her cheeks. "You make it sound like we used you." I shook my head. "You didn't have to try. I volunteered. Family isn't who takes the most. It's who remembers who paid the light bill." She blinked at me, unsure how to respond. The air between us felt different now, still heavy, but balanced. Kira wiped her face with the back of her hand. "So that's it. You're just done helping us." I met her eyes. Steady. "I'm done mistaking help for belonging." The wind stirred again, gentle through the lavender. She nodded once, wordless, and turned toward her car. I watched her go, the sunlight falling in thin ribbons across the path, each one marking a distance I hadn't realized I'd already learned to live with. The morning after Kira's visit, I woke before sunrise. The house felt still, like it was holding its breath. I made coffee and sat by the window until the sky over the harbor shifted from gray to a soft, forgiving pink. By the time I finished my second cup, I had made a decision, just after 10. I drove to Rockland to meet Mr. Tuttle, the lawyer who had handled my husband's estate years ago. His office sat on Main Street, above a small insurance agency. The same brass plaque still hung beside the door, polished to a quiet shine. He greeted me with that gentle courtesy older men seem to keep for women who've endured more than they say. "Corliss," he said, shaking my hand. "It's been a long time." "It has," I said, "but I think it's time to put a few things in order." We sat across from each other at his oak desk. As I explained what I wanted, he listened without interruption, no questions, no hesitation. A living trust for the house, my savings, and the small collection of paintings I'd gathered over the years. I wanted it all arranged so that no one could touch what I had worked for unless I allowed it. He nodded slowly as he wrote. "You're being wise," he said. "This isn't uncommon." I smiled faintly. "Maybe. But for me, it's new." We reviewed the papers, his fountain pen gliding over each page, my initials following in their quiet trail. When he passed me the final document, I signed my full name. As I set the pen down, I said softly, "This time, I'm designing something that can't be taken." He looked at me for a moment, then gave a small nod, the kind that understands more than words allow. Outside, the air smelled of sea salt and asphalt warming under the sun. On the drive home, I rolled down the window. The harbor flashed between the trees, boats rocking gently in the tide. For the first time in months, my breath came steady, like something in me had finally been returned to its rightful owner. 3 days after I met with Mr. Tuttle, the knock came. It was early evening, the harbor wind moving through the pines, carrying the faint clang of a buoy bell. I had just finished washing the dishes when I saw their car pull up, Kira in the passenger seat, Nolan behind the wheel. For a moment, I thought they might sit there and drive away. But the doors opened, and they walked up the path together. The way they moved told me what kind of conversation this would be. Nolan spoke first. "We need to talk." I opened the door but didn't step aside. "Then talk." Kira's eyes were red, though not from tears this time. "You changed everything. You locked us out of your accounts, the house, the trust. You didn't even tell us." I met her gaze. "It wasn't yours to be told." Nolan's jaw tightened. "We're family, Corliss. You don't do that to family." I felt the truth of his words and the sting of their irony. "Family," I said slowly, "isn't a bank you draw from. It's a light you keep lit when people earn their way home." Kira took a step closer. "You'll lose us over this." The wind shifted, brushing a strand of hair across her face. For an instant, she looked so much like her younger self barefoot in this same yard, laughing at nothing that I almost reached for her. But the years between us stood solid. "I already did," I said quietly, "the day you decided I wasn't special enough." She froze, eyes flickering, as if she'd heard something she didn't expect. Nolan looked away first. The silence between us held the weight of everything that had been spent, and everything that could never be repaid. I nodded once. Not in anger, but acknowledgement. "Take care of each other," I said. Then I closed the door. Not fast, not hard, just until the latch caught. The sound was soft, final, almost kind. For a long time, I stood there with my hand on the frame, feeling the cool wood beneath my palm, the house quiet around me, the air outside moving on. Several days passed without another word from Kira or Nolan. The silence no longer felt sharp. It had thinned into something easier to live with, like air after a storm. I filled the hours with small things, watering the herbs, folding the linens, writing reminders in my notebook. The world was steady again, even if smaller. One afternoon, as I sorted through emails, a name I barely recognized appeared at the top of the screen. Ellen Haversham. I opened it, expecting a receipt or advertisement. Instead, the first line made me still. "Dear Mrs. Anwen, you don't know me well, but I used to work with Nolan. I hope it's all right that I'm writing." I read on, my heartbeat slowing with every sentence. "He once mentioned you at the office. He said you were too generous for your own good, that you always helped when they were behind on bills. I don't know what happened recently, Monsieur, but I heard things changed. And I wanted to say, I think you proved him wrong. Generosity is a gift. Boundaries are proof that you value it. Most people never learn the difference. She had attached a small photo of the harbor taken from her apartment window. The caption read, "Peace is expensive, worth paying for once." I read the message twice before leaning back in my chair. My throat tightened in a way that wasn't grief. It was relief. Recognition, someone outside the story seeing the whole picture for the first time. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and smiled. The air in the room felt lighter, touched by something clean. I typed a short reply. Thank you, Ellen. I think I finally understand what that means after sending it. I sat there a while, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the same sound that had once marked my loneliest nights. Now it sounded different. Steady, certain, the kind of quiet that feels like being seen. A month passed. The house had settled into its own rhythm again, the soft creak of the floorboards, the kettle's quiet sigh each morning, the faint rustle of the bay wind through the curtains. The silence that once stung had become a companion. I had stopped checking my phone for messages that never came. That Sunday afternoon, I set out a pot of tea and 3 cups on the porch table. 2 women from my library circle, May and Lorna, came by after their volunteer shift. They had started visiting once a week, never asking about Kira, never pressing for details. We talked about books, recipes, and the stubborn rhubarb that refused to grow in May's garden. When they left, the porch felt full even after they were gone. I stayed there, watching the harbor beyond the trees. The water caught the late light in broken flashes, like pieces of glass being mended. On the small table beside me lay a brass plaque I'd ordered from a craftsman in town. The letters were simple and clean, etched with care. Welcome by respect. I held it in my hands for a moment, feeling its quiet weight. Then I stood on the step stool and fastened it just below the porch light. The screws turned easily, as if the wood had been waiting for it. When I finished, I stepped back. The plaque caught the last edge of sunlight and glowed faintly, like it already understood its purpose. Dusk came slowly, the sky folding into a deeper blue. I switched on the porch light. Its glow spilled softly across the railings, the brass letters shining steady against the salt air. I sat again with my tea, the cup warm between my palms. From the street below came the distant sound of a gull and the steady rhythm of the tide. Peace isn't surrender, I whispered to the quiet. It's maintenance. The porch light burned against the growing dark, steady, patient, unbothered by the wind. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to guard it. I simply let it shine.